The air inside Bay 9 of Aeon Terminus tasted of recycled copper and stale ozone, a flavor Kalen Voss had grown to loathe over the past 3 long years. He adjusted his grease-stained jumpsuit, the fabric stiff against his skin. Every morning at exactly 0600 hours, the station's artificial pulse thrummed through the deck plates, a mechanical heartbeat for a graveyard of souls. But today was different. Today, the Eternal Bonds courier was scheduled to arrive. Kalen wiped his palms on his thighs, feeling a sudden sharp spike of anxiety. 2 months ago, in a haze of synthetic whiskey and bone-deep loneliness on the anniversary of the Lumina Reach disaster, he had clicked confirm on a match profile. He had requested someone small, a quiet human soul who wouldn't mind the silence of the obsidian cloud or the hum of the gas harvesters. He wanted a partner to share the burden of being alive when everyone else he loved was a ghost. The docking clamps groaned, a sound like grinding teeth. Through the reinforced viewport, a ship unlike any Syndicate vessel slid into the bay. It was sleek, organic, its hull shimmering with an iridescent violet sheen. A Xylosian long-range cutter. "Kalen, you look like you're about to vomit," a voice crackled over his comms. It was Jax, a Trillonian welder with scales the color of rusted iron. "Relax, gearhead. It's just a bride, not a tax auditor." "Shut it, Jax," Kalen muttered, his eyes glued to the airlock. The pressure hissed as the seals broke. The ramp descended, and a heavy, rhythmic thud echoed through the bay, the sound of massive weight meeting metal. The silhouette that emerged was not small. It was not human. It was a mountain of obsidian and amber light. Kalen froze. The being stepped into the flickering fluorescent lights of the station. She stood at least 8 feet tall, her frame corded with muscles that looked like they had been forged in a high-gravity forge. Her skin was a deep, translucent amber, revealing bioluminescent veins that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic blue. 4 powerful arms were folded across her chest, the upper pair broad and formidable, the lower pair slender and precise. Her face was a masterwork of alien geometry, high, ridged cheekbones and 6 eyes arranged in 2 vertical rows of 3, each one a swirling nebula of gold and black. She wore armor that seemed grown rather than manufactured, etched with glowing runes. As she moved, the floor groaned under her weight. Her presence didn't just fill the room, it commanded it. "Kalen Voss," she said. Her voice was not a whisper, but a resonant vibration that rattled the loose screws in the overhead panels. It was melodious, yet carried the weight of a decree. I am," Kalen managed to choke out, his neck craning back so far it hurt. There must be a glitch. The service matched me with—" The being tilted her head, all 6 eyes focusing on him with an intensity that made his knees feel like water. "Contract identification, Alpha 974, match verified by the Xylosian Archivist Council, compatibility rating, 88%. She stepped closer, her shadow engulfing him entirely. The air around her smelled of rain and ancient parchment, a scent that didn't belong on this scrap heap of a station. "I am Vespera," she announced, her upper right hand reaching out. For a terrifying second, Kalen thought she was going to crush his skull. Instead, she gently touched the small silver pendant hanging from his neck, a relic from Lumina Reach. "I have traveled across the great void to find you, Kalen Voss. Our fates are no longer solitary." Before Kalen could find his breath, the station's emergency sirens screamed to life. Red lights bathed the bay in a hellish, strobing glow. "Warning," the station AI droned. "Proximity alert. Syndicate strikecraft detected. Initiating lockdown." Vespera's posture changed instantly. The gentle curiosity in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. Her upper arms reached behind her back, drawing 2 long, vibrating blades that hummed with kinetic energy. "The hunters are here," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Stay behind me, Kalen. This was not a meeting. It was an ambush." "What? Why would the Syndicate come for a match ship?" Kalen shouted over the roar of the alarms. Vespera looked down at him, her bioluminescence flaring to a brilliant, angry red. "Because I am not just a bride, Kalen Voss. I am the last witness of my people. And you are the key they have been trying to bury for 15 years. A massive explosion rocked the bay. The reinforced doors buckled as thermal charges detonated. Syndicate mercenaries clad in matte black tactical gear swarmed through the smoke. "Kalen!" Jax's voice screamed over the comms before cutting out in a burst of static. Kalen felt a massive, warm hand wrap around his waist. Vespera hoisted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing, tucking him securely under one of her lower arms. "Hold your breath, human," she commanded. "We are bugging out." She moved with a speed that defied her size. Her upper arms became a whirlwind of shimmering steel, parrying plasma bolts with impossible precision. A mercenary tried to intercept them. Vespera didn't even slow down. She kicked him, sending the man flying 20 meters across the bay into a stack of fuel crates. "I'm going to die," Kalen whimpered, his face pressed against her cool, glowing skin. "Not today," Vespera rumbled. "Today we fight. Tomorrow we ask questions." She leapt toward a high-maintenance shaft, her powerful legs shattering the floor plating upon takeoff. They disappeared into the darkness of the station's gut just as the bay was engulfed in a secondary explosion. The maintenance conduits of Aeon Terminus were never meant for a Xylosian. Vespera had to move in a crouched, predatory glide, her armor scraping against the conduits with a sound like grinding stones. Kalen was still tucked under her arm, his mind a chaotic mess of fear and confusion. Every time she leapt over a steam pipe or swung through a vertical shaft, his stomach did a somersault. You can put me down now," Kalen gasped as they reached a small, hidden sublevel, a junction box he used for illegal repairs. Vespera set him down with surprising gentleness. She immediately turned back to the entrance, her 6 eyes scanning the darkness. Her blades hissed as they retracted into her gauntlets, but she didn't relax. "Aeon Terminus is compromised," she stated, her tone as cold as the void outside. "They didn't just track my ship. They were waiting for the moment we touched down." Kalen leaned against a vibrating coolant tank, trying to stop his hands from shaking. "Who? The Syndicate? I'm just a low-level tech, Vespera. I fix gas scrubbers. I don't do conspiracies." Vespera turned her full gaze on him. In the dim, flickering green of the emergency lights, she looked like a vengeful deity. "You are Kalen Voss, son of Eris Voss, the chief data architect of Lumina Reach. Do not lie to me, human. It wastes the little time we have." Kalen flinched at the name. Lumina Reach. The words felt like a physical blow. 15 years ago, the colony had been the crown jewel of the Aetheris Syndicate, a utopia of shared knowledge. Then, the data collapse happened, a freak atmospheric event, the company claimed, that wiped the colony's servers and killed 300,000 people in their sleep. Kalen's parents, his sister, everyone he knew, gone in a single night of silence. "That was an accident," Kalen whispered. "A tragic, horrible accident." "It was a purge," Vespera corrected. Her upper left hand reached into a hidden compartment in her chest armor and pulled out a small, crystal-like shard that glowed with an internal, swirling gold light. "My people, the Xylosians, were the silent observers of the Syndicate's expansion. We recorded the truth they tried to erase. Lumina Reach didn't suffer a collapse. Your father discovered that Aetheris was harvesting the collective consciousness of the colonists to fuel their void-folding engines. They weren't building a utopia. They were building a battery." Kalen felt the world tilt. "That's impossible. You can't turn people into fuel." "The Syndicate found a way," she said, "and your father encoded the evidence into your pendant, the one you wear now. It's not a memento, Kalen. It's a Cortex key." Kalen reached up, clutching the silver trinket. He had never opened it. He had always thought it was just a piece of junk his father had given him for his 20th birthday, right before the end. "Why the match service?" Kalen asked, his voice cracking. "Why now?" "The Syndicate's influence is waning," Vespera explained, her eyes tracking a noise in the vents above. "A new board of directors is rising, led by a man named Cyrus Vane. He wants to finish what the old guard started. He knew I had the records, and he knew you had the key. He manipulated the match service to bring us both to the most isolated station in the sector. One target, one location. Clean, efficient. Jax, the workers, they're all going to be killed because of us," Kalen said, the weight of the realization crushing him. "Not if we move," Vespera said. She stepped closer, her massive frame towering over him, but her expression softened. If an alien with 6 eyes could be said to look soft. Kalen, I did not choose this match because of a computer algorithm. I chose it because I saw your father's final transmission. He didn't just save the data, he prayed for his son to find a life worth living. I am here to fulfill that prayer, one way or another. A heavy metallic thud echoed from the corridor outside. The sound of boots, many boots. They've found us, Vespera hissed. She handed Kalen a small, sleek device that looked like a specialized multi-tool. This is a phase shifter. It's tuned to your biorhythms. If they get past me, aim for their power packs. Do not hesitate. I've never shot anyone, Kalen said, staring at the alien weapon. Then today you learn, she replied. She moved to the door, her bioluminescence dimming until she was almost invisible in the shadows. Stay close. Use the dust licker's confusion against them. We are heading for the secondary docking bays. My ship is KIA, but there's a courier shuttle in Bay 3. Kalen took a deep breath. The scent of rain and parchment from Vespera seemed to steady him. He wasn't Daniel Mercer, the lonely engineer, anymore. He was Kalen Voss, and for the first time in 15 years, he had a reason to fight. All right, Kalen whispered, gripping the phase shifter. Let's go give them hell. Vespera's teeth flashed in a terrifyingly beautiful smile. I like your spirit, human. Perhaps the 88% compatibility was an underestimation. The door exploded inward. Vespera moved before the smoke could clear, a blur of amber light and humming steel. Kalen dove behind a stack of crates, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The battle for Aeon Terminus, and the truth of the galaxy, had begun. The internal conduits of Aeon Terminus were never designed for a creature of Vespera's stature. The ventilation shafts groaned under her weight, the reinforced titanium alloy buckling slightly as she moved with a predatory, quadrupedal grace that seemed to defy the cramped dimensions of the station's underbelly. Kalen Voss scrambled behind her, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps that tasted of industrial lubricant and ancient dust. Every few meters, a spray of sparks would erupt from a severed wire, illuminating Vespera's amber skin in brief, violent flashes of blue. Stay low, Kalen, she whispered, her voice vibrating through the very floor plates beneath his palms. Her 6 eyes were not fixed forward. Instead, they moved in independent pairs, scanning the ceiling, the floor, and the darkness behind them. I'm trying, he wheezed, his fingers slipping on a patch of leaked coolant. We're heading toward the primary junction for Sector 7. If we can bypass the central hub, we might make it to the cargo lifts without being pinned down. Vesper came to a sudden halt. One of her lower arms reached back, pinning Kalen against the cold metal wall with surprising gentleness, but immovable force. Her upper arms drew her vibrating blades, the kinetic hum reaching a high-pitched whine. Dust lickers, she hissed, using the derogatory term for Syndicate mercenaries. 6 of them, 20 meters ahead, past the next filtration unit. Kalen squinted into the gloom. He saw nothing but shadows and the occasional flicker of a dying light panel. How can you be so sure? I can hear their heartbeats, Kalen Voss. They are erratic, fearful. They carry high-frequency pulse rifles. She shifted her weight, her bioluminescence dimming until she was little more than a smudge of darkness in the tunnel. Wait here. If I do not return in 60 seconds, take the service ladder to your left. Wait, Vespera, he hissed, but she was already gone. She didn't move like a soldier. She moved like a ghost. There was no sound of footsteps, only the faint rustle of her organic armor against the pipes. Kalen gripped the phase shifter she had given him, his knuckles white. He checked the display. Full charge. He didn't want to use it. He had spent his life fixing things, putting broken components back together, ensuring the gas harvesters kept the station alive. The idea of unmaking something, even a Syndicate roach, made his stomach churn. Suddenly, the darkness ahead erupted. There was no gunfire at first, only the sound of shattering glass and the heavy thud of bodies hitting metal. Then came the screams. Contact! Roach 1 is down! Someone yelled, followed by a frantic burst of pulse fire. The blue bolts illuminated the shaft, revealing a nightmare of motion. Vespera was a whirlwind of obsidian limbs. She was too fast for the narrow space, bouncing off the walls, her blades carving through the mercenaries' tactical gear as if it were parchment. Kalen watched, frozen, as a mercenary scrambled backward, his rifle jammed. The man's face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended species. Vespera loomed over him, her forearms spread wide, casting a shadow that swallowed the man whole. "Please," the soldier begged, "I'm just on contract." Vespera's upper blade stopped inches from his throat. Her central eyes narrowed, glowing with a fierce gold intensity. "You serve the architects of extinction," she rumbled. "There is no contract that excuses the erasure of worlds." She didn't kill him. Instead, she struck him with the flat of her blade, a blow that sent him into unconsciousness instantly. Kalen scrambled forward, stepping over the groaning forms of the other 5 mercenaries. Vesper stood in the center of the carnage, her chest heaving, the blue light in her veins pulsing like a frantic heart. She looked at Kalen, and for a second he saw the warrior, the cold, efficient witness of 1,000 deaths. "We must move," she said, her voice strained. "The station AI is tracking my kinetic signature. They will vent the atmosphere in this sector within 3 minutes." "Then follow me," Kalen said, his fear momentarily overridden by his knowledge of the station. "There's a manual override for the airlocks in the maintenance sub-office. It's a shortcut to the courier bays." They ran. They ignored the sirens and the automated warnings that blared in a dozen different languages. They passed through the communal quarters, where the remnants of Kalen's old life lay scattered. A half-finished cup of synthetic coffee, a digital frame showing a blurry image of a forest on a world he hadn't seen in 2 decades. As they reached the sub-office, a door hissed open. A small, scaled figure stumbled out, clutching a welding torch like a weapon. "Kalen?" Jax gasped, his Trelawney eyes blinking in confusion. "What the void is going on? The roaches are everywhere, and they're venting the lower decks." "Jax, get to the escape pods!" Kalen shouted, grabbing the welder's shoulder. "Bay 4 is still clear." "I can't," Jax said, his voice trembling. "The pods are locked down by the Syndicate. They're trapping us here, Kalen. They're going to burn the whole station to get to whatever they're looking for." Vespera stepped out of the shadows, her height forcing her to hunch under the ceiling. Jax let out a yelp of pure terror, dropping his torch. "She is with me, Jax," Kalen said quickly. She's the bride." "The bride?" Jax stared at the 8-foot-tall warrior. "Kalen, you've got a weird sense of taste, gearhead." Vespera's eyes flickered toward Jax. The small welder was trembling, his scales clattering against each other. She reached out a slender lower hand, and for a moment, Kalen feared she would push him aside. Instead, she gently adjusted the breathing apparatus on Jax's chest. "The air in Sector 4 is being poisoned," she said softly. "Take this frequency. It will override the pod locks. Tell them it was provided by the last witness." She tapped a code into Jax's wristling. The Trelawney stared at her, then at Kalen. "Who are you people?" "Nobody," Kalen said. "Just people who've had enough. Now go, Jax. That's an order from the senior engineer." Jax didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled down the corridor, his tail lashing behind him. Kalen watched him go, a sudden, sharp pang of guilt hitting his chest. He was leaving them. He was escaping with a Xylosian warrior, while his friends and co-workers were left to face the Syndicate's wrath. "They are not your responsibility, Kalen Voss," Vespera said, as if reading his thoughts. "They are," he countered, turning to the terminal and typing furiously. "They're the only family I have left. This station, it's a dump, but we looked out for each other. That's what family means where I come from. It's not about who you're born to, it's about who stays when the life support fails." Vesper stayed silent for a moment, her 6 eyes unreadable. "In my culture, we say that the stars do not choose where they shine, but they choose to burn. You have a warrior's heart, even if you hide it behind a text jumpsuit." "I'm no warrior," Kalen muttered, the terminal chiming as the locks for the courier bay hissed open. "I'm just a guy who wants to stop running." They stepped into the courier bay, and the sight that met them was beautiful and terrible. A single Syndicate courier ship, painted in the matte black and gold of the executive fleet, sat on the pad. It was fueled and ready, but standing in front of the ramp was a figure Kalen recognized all too well, Director Hallowell. The station commander was a thin, severe man with a cybernetic eye that whirred as it tracked their movement. He held a detonator in one hand and a pulse pistol in the other. Behind him, two heavy combat droids stood like sentinels. "Kalen," Hallowell said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to survive the first wave. And you, Vespera, you've caused quite a bit of property damage." "Let them go, Hallowell," Kalen said, stepping forward. "The station is dying. You've already won." "Won?" Hallowell laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "I'm an employee, Kalen, just like you. And my employers are very specific about their requirements. They want the witness, and they want the key." He raised the detonator. "If I press this, the fuel lines for the entire bay ignite. We all go to the void together. Or you can hand over the pendant, and I might let the human live long enough to reach an escape pod." Kalen looked at Vespera. She was perfectly still, her bioluminescence a dull, steady blue. She didn't look at Hallowell. She looked at Kalen. "The choice is yours, Kalen Voss," she whispered. "But remember, the Syndicate does not trade in lives. They only trade in assets." Kalen looked at the pendant. He thought of his father's face, of the thousands of souls trapped in the void-folding engines, of Jax and the others. He looked at Hallowell, a man who had sold his humanity for a title and a cybernetic eye. "You're right, Hallowell," Kalen said, his voice surprisingly steady. "You are an employee, and I've always been better at managing the machines than you." Kalen didn't fire at Hallowell. He fired at the overhead fire suppression system. The phase shifter's beam didn't just break the pipes. It ionized the suppression foam, creating a blinding, static-filled cloud that scrambled sensors and obscured vision. "Move!" Kalen screamed. Vespera didn't hesitate. She was a blur of motion, her blades taking the heads off the combat droids before their sensors could recalibrate. Hallowell fired blindly into the foam, but he was no match for a Xylosian in her element. Kalen scrambled up the ramp of the courier ship, his fingers flying over the emergency start sequence. He had fixed these ships 100 times. He knew their quirks, their weaknesses, their secrets. Vespera leapt into the hole just as the first explosion rocked the bay. Hallowell had pressed the detonator, but the ionized foam had dampened the blast, turning a lethal explosion into a massive, surging fireball that pushed the ship toward the launch doors. "Punch it, Kalen," Vespera shouted, slamming the airlock shut. "I'm trying. It's a Syndicate lock code." He stared at the screen. 50,000 credits for a hint, he hissed. "Think, Kalen. Think like a roach." He didn't use the code. He bypassed the logic gate entirely, feeding a feedback loop from the ship's primary reactor into the station's docking clamps. The clamps didn't release. They melted. The courier ship surged forward, propelled by its own engines and the dying breath of Aeon Terminus. As they cleared the bay, Kalen looked back through the rear monitors. The station was a silhouette against the violet nebula, fire blooming in its vents like small angry stars. "We made it," he whispered, collapsing into the pilot's seat. Vesper stood behind him, her upper hands resting on the back of his chair. Her presence was a warm, steady weight in the small cockpit. "We have escaped the station," she said, her voice soft. "But the journey has only just begun. The Syndicate will not let their prize slip away so easily." Kalen looked at the star chart on the console. Thousands of points of light, each one a mystery, each one a potential grave. He looked at the alien woman who was technically his bride, a creature of myth and war who had saved his life. "Where to?" he asked. "To the only place they cannot follow," Vesper said, "to the grave of the first son. It is time you saw what your father truly died to protect." The courier ship, which Vespera identified through the ship's registry as the Starseeker, hummed with a precision Kalen wasn't used to. On Aeon Terminus, every machine rattled, hissed, or moaned under the strain of age and neglect. Here the life support was a soft, rhythmic purr, and the air smelled of nothing but filtered oxygen and the subtle floral musk of Vespera's skin. They were 3 hours into the jump, suspended in the shimmering non-space of the voidfold. Kalen sat at the engineering console, his fingers moving reflexively over the diagnostics. He was trying to keep his mind busy, trying to ignore the fact that he was currently a fugitive from the most powerful organization in the galaxy, traveling with a woman who could snap him like a dry twig. Vespera was in the rear of the cabin, her armor partially retracted. Without the obsidian plates, she looked less like a weapon and more like Well, Kaylin wasn't sure. She was still alien, still massive, but the way her bioluminescence shifted in soft, undulating waves across her skin was mesmerizing. She was studying the data core he had snatched from the station, her lower arms holding it, while her upper arms moved in a series of complex meditative gestures. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the hum of the engines. Kaylin didn't look up from his screen. "Do what?" "Save the small one." "Jax, you risked your life and our escape to give him the override code. In the cold logic of the Syndicate, that was an irrational act." Kaylin stopped typing. He looked at his reflection in the dark monitor. Jax has a family on Velonis Prime, a daughter who's waiting for him to come home after his shift ends. If I had left him there, that girl would have grown up wondering why her father never came back. Just like I did. He turned his chair to face her. "I spent 15 years being rational, Vespera. I did my job, I kept my head down, and I let the Syndicate take everything that mattered because I was afraid. But seeing you step off that ship, it reminded me that the universe is bigger than my fear. If I'm going to die, I'd rather die being the person my sister Rin thought I was." Vespera's 6 eyes focused on him. "Rin. You speak of her often in your sleep." Kaylin felt a flush of embarrassment. I do?" "She was your sole anchor," Vespera said, her voice dropping to a gentle resonance. "My people believe that we are not individuals, but echoes of those who loved us. When your sister died at Lumina Reach, a part of you became an echo waiting for a voice." She stood up and moved toward him. The cockpit felt suddenly very small. She knelt, bringing her face level with his. Up close, her gold eyes were like swirling galaxies, deep and full of a wisdom that made Kaylin feel like a child. "Kaylin Voss, it is time for the truth. The match was not an accident, but it was not entirely the Syndicate's doing either." Kaylin frowned. "What do you mean? Tron said they orchestrated it." "They did," Vesper said. "They wanted to bring the key and the witness together so they could eliminate us both. But they did not choose me. I chose the contract." Kaylin stared at her. You saw my profile?" "I saw your grief," she said. "I have spent 100 years as the last witness, carrying the memories of extinct civilizations. My heart was a graveyard. When I saw your application, I saw someone who was also a graveyard. I thought, perhaps if 2 graveyards were brought together, they might become a garden." She reached out, her slender lower hand hovering near his chest. "The pendant." "May I?" Kaylin nodded, his breath hitching. He unclipped the silver chain and handed it to her. It looked like a toy in her large palm. Vespera didn't open it. She held it against her forehead, her bioluminescence flaring to a brilliant, blinding white. The air in the cockpit grew cold, and a low musical hum filled the space. "Ancestors, hear the echo," she chanted in a language Kaylin didn't know, yet felt he understood in his marrow. "Open the gate." The pendant didn't click open. It dissolved. The silver metal turned into a liquid stream of light that flowed into the ship's primary console. Suddenly, the Starseeker's monitors exploded with data. Hundreds of thousands of files, images, and audio recordings cascaded across the screens. Kaylin stood up, his mouth hanging open. This is everything. Every crime, every murder, every planet they stripped of life. It's not just Lumina Reach. It's the whole history of the Syndicate." "Wait," Vespera said, her voice sharp. "Look at the subroutine." A window opened in the center of the main display. It was a video file, date stamped 15 years ago. A man appeared on the screen. Eris Voss. He looked tired, his brown hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were bright with a desperate kind of hope. "Kaylin, if you're seeing this, it means you found the witness," Eris said. His voice was a ghost, a memory given form by light and code. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there to see the man you've become. I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on your shoulders." The man on the screen took a shaky breath. "The Syndicate thinks this is just data. They think it's a record of their crimes. But it's more than that. The pendant contains the alpha signal. It's a kill switch for the void-folding engines. If you broadcast this signal from the grave of the first sun, every Aetheris engine in the galaxy will cease to function. Their ships will stop. Their stations will fail. Their empire will collapse in a single heartbeat. Eris leaned closer to the camera. But Kalen, hear me. The signal requires a host, a biological bridge to connect the data to the stars. The person who broadcasts the signal, they won't make it back. The energy surge will rewrite their cellular structure. Kalen felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. A sacrifice. My father didn't just give me the truth, he whispered. He gave me a death sentence. Vespera turned to him, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't known either. The last witness was supposed to be the one to carry the data, but the bridge had to be human. No, she said, her voice a low growl. There must be another way. My people's technology. There isn't, Kalen said, staring at the code. It's designed for my genetic sequence. It's built on the Voss family's neural map. It has to be me. The cockpit was silent for a long time. The Starseeker continued its journey through the void fold, a tiny speck of light in a sea of nothingness. Kalen looked at the alien woman he was supposed to marry, the creature who had chosen his grief to match her own. Is that why they wanted us together? Kalen asked. So we could kill each other? Vespera's hands clenched into fists. No, they wanted to kill us before the signal could be broadcast. They feared the witness could guide the key. And they were right. She stepped toward him, her height no longer intimidating but protective. Kalen, we do not have to do this. We can turn the ship around. We can disappear into the outer rim. My people have hidden colonies. We could live. We could have the life you wanted. A quiet life. Kalen looked at the screen, at the millions of lives being harvested by the Syndicate's engines even now. He thought of Jax and his daughter. He thought of Rin, who had died in the dark because a corporation wanted to save 10 credits on a safety valve. If I run, Kalen said, his voice trembling but clear, then Hallowell was right. I'm just an employee. I'm just a part of their machine. But if we do this, then my family didn't die for nothing. He looked at Vespera. You said that the stars choose to burn. I think it's time I started my own fire. Vespera studied him for a long, agonizing minute. Then she did something Kalen never expected. She knelt before him, all four of her hands coming together in a gesture of profound respect. I came to find a husband, Kalen Voss, she said, but I have found a king. I will guide you to the grave of the first son. I will be your shield, your sword, and your witness. And if the stars demand a price, we will face it together. The ship chimed, a warning light flashing on the console. Proximity alert. We are dropping out of the void fold. Kalen took the controls. The stars of the grave of the first son exploded into view, a massive, dying red giant surrounded by a ring of shattered planets and ancient debris. It was a graveyard of worlds, the perfect place for an empire to die. And waiting for them, silhouetted against the dying sun, was a Syndicate fleet. 30 ships, Kalen noted, his fingers moving across the tactical display. Heavy cruisers, carriers, and in the center a command vessel that made the Starseeker look like a speck of dust. It's a trap, Kalen said, his voice surprisingly calm. They knew where the grave was. Then we must be the hunters, Vespera said, her blades extending with a lethal hiss. Kalen, take the ship into the debris field. Use the shadows of the dead worlds. I will prepare the hold for the broadcast. Vespera, he said, stopping her before she could leave the cockpit. She turned, her 6 eyes focusing on him. If we don't make it, thank you for not being what I ordered. She reached out, her upper hand resting briefly against his cheek. I am exactly what you needed, Kalen Voss, and you are the only human who has ever truly seen me. She disappeared into the back of the ship. Kalen gripped the yoke, his eyes fixed on the massive fleet ahead. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a soldier. He was a systems engineer, and it was time to shut down the Syndicate's power. He dived the Starseeker into the heart of the debris field, the ship's engines screaming as he pushed them to 300% of their rated capacity. Behind him, the Syndicate fleet began to move, a swarm of black and gold predators hungry for their prize. But Kalen Voss wasn't running anymore. He was coming home. As the first pulse bolts began to hammer against the Starseeker's shields, Kalen felt a strange sense of peace. He thought of his sister Rin. He thought of his father. And he thought of Vespera, the alien woman who had taught him that even in the darkest void, you could choose to be a light. "Let's get to work," he whispered to the ghost of his father. The ship roared into the darkness, a tiny spark of defiance heading straight into the mouth of the beast. The hull of the Starseeker shrieked as a kinetic slug from a Syndicate heavy cruiser grazed the portside shielding. Inside the cockpit, Kalen Voss was a blur of frantic motion, his hands dancing across the haptic interface as he rerouted power from the auxiliary heaters to the forward thrusters. The ship groaned, a deep metallic protest that vibrated through Kalen's boots. "We've got 2 interceptors on our 6, Kalen shouted over the roar of the venting coolant. "They're faster than us, Vespera. If I don't dump the heat sinks now, we're going to be nothing but a smudge of carbon in 10 seconds. "Do what you must, Kalen Voss." Vespera's voice boomed from the rear hold. Her tone was eerily calm, the sound of a warrior who had accepted the possibility of a violent end long ago. "I am securing the secondary airlock. They are attempting to tether us with mag hooks." Kalen slammed his palm against a glowing red icon. The ship lurched as the heat sinks were purged, a blinding flare of white light erupting behind them. The pursuing interceptors swerved, their sensors momentarily blinded by the thermal wash. "Nice move, gearhead." Jax's voice crackled over a ghost frequency, faint and distorted by the nebula's interference. "We've got the pods clear of Bay 9. Most of the crew made it. We're bugging out to the outer rim. Don't let those roaches flatline you." "Jax!" Kalen's heart leaped. "Get as far as you can. Tell the others. Tell them we're finishing this." The comms dissolved into static. Kalen didn't have time to mourn the connection. He dove the Starseeker deeper into the debris field of the grave of the first sun. Huge chunks of shattered planets, some the size of small moons, tumbled in the gravity well of the dying red giant. He wove the ship through a forest of jagged rock and frozen iron, the proximity alarm screaming a constant, jagged note. A violent jolt threw Kalen forward, his harness biting into his shoulders. The monitors flickered, showing a breach in the cargo bay. "Boarding party." Vespera's voice was followed by the sharp electric hiss of her phase shifters. "They've breached the aft seal. Stay in the cockpit, Kalen. Lock the bulkhead, and do not open it until the air is clear of Syndicate filth." Kalen ignored her. He couldn't just sit in a chair while she fought off a squad of professional killers. He grabbed a heavy-duty plasma torch and a magnetic wrench, his makeshift zip guns, and unbuckled. He hit the manual release for the bulkhead, the door sliding open with a hiss to reveal a scene of absolute carnage. The cargo bay was filled with the acrid smoke of ionized air and the smell of blood. 3 Syndicate mercenaries, clad in advanced exoskeleton armor, were already on the floor, their suits smoking from Vespera's blades. But 4 more had pinned her down near the reactor core. They weren't using pulse rifles. They were using weighted tether nets designed to neutralize high-gravity species. Vespera was a whirlwind of obsidian limbs, but the nets were coated in a neural-dampening gel. Her bioluminescence was flickering, fading from a vibrant blue to a sickly, pale gray. "Take her alive," one of the mercenaries barked, his voice amplified by his helmet's speakers. "The director wants the witness intact. Kill the engineer if he moves." Kalen didn't wait for them to see him. He lunged from the shadows, slamming the magnetic wrench into the nearest mercenary's power pack. The magnet surged, short-circuiting the exoskeleton and sending the man into a convulsing heap. "Hey, Roach!" Kalen yelled, igniting the plasma torch. "Over here!" The mercenary leader turned, his visor reflecting the brilliant blue flame of the torch. "You're the little ghost from Lumina Reach? You're 100,000 credits overdue for a grave, kid." The mercenary raised a heavy stun baton, but he was slow, hampered by the tight confines of the bay. Kalen ducked, the air whistling over his head as the baton smashed into a support pillar. Kalen drove the plasma torch into the mercenary's knee joint. The armored plating hissed and melted, and the man let out a gargled scream. Vespera saw her opening. With a roar that vibrated Kalen's teeth, she ripped through the neural nets. Her upper arms grabbed the 2 remaining mercenaries by their helmets and slammed them together with enough force to shatter the reinforced carbon fiber. They dropped like stones. She stood tall, her chest heaving, her gold eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. She looked at the wounded leader, then at Kalen. The blue light in her veins surged back to life, brilliant and defiant. She didn't kill the leader immediately. She knelt, her upper blade resting against his visor. Tell Cyrus Vane that the witness does not forgive, and tell him the engineer is no longer a ghost. She struck him once, a precise blow that silenced his screaming. Kalen slumped against the reactor housing, the plasma torch slipping from his trembling fingers. I think I'm going to throw up. You fought well, Kalen Voss, Vespera said, her voice soft but filled with a new kind of respect. You protected your partner. Partner, he repeated, the word tasting strange and heavy on his tongue. Not just a tech and a warrior anymore. Vespera reached out, her lower hand gripping his shoulder. The touch was warm, solid. We are 48 kilometers from the Graves core. The Syndicate fleet is forming a blockade. They know we need to reach the monolith to broadcast the signal. How are we supposed to get through 30 heavy cruisers in this piece of junk? Kalen asked, gesturing to the battered ship. We do not go through them, Vespera said, her eyes shifting to the monitors. We go under them, through the mantle of the shattered world. Kalen looked at the remains of the planet designated Primus 4. It was a hollow shell of iron and silicate, its core exposed to the void. It was a suicide run. The gravity fluctuations inside the planet's remnants would tear a standard ship apart. That's a death trap, Vespera. It is a path, she countered, and it is the only way to reach the monolith before their long-range cannons lock onto our signature. Do you trust your hands, Kalen? Do you trust the machines you have spent 15 years befriending? Kalen looked at the console, then at the alien woman who had chosen to link her destiny to a lonely, broken human. He thought of his sister Rin and how she used to say that home wasn't a place, but the people who stood by you when the lights went out. I trust you, he said, and I'm a damn good engineer. He climbed back into the pilot's seat. Vespera stood behind him, her upper arms resting on his shoulders. The Starseeker roared to life, its engines screaming as Kalen pushed the throttle to the firewall. Hang on, he muttered, his eyes fixed on the yawning chasm of the shattered world. This is going to be a bumpy ride. The ship dove into the darkness of the planet's interior. Jagged spires of cooling magma rushed past them, inches from the hull. Kalen steered by instinct, feeling the ship's vibrations through his fingertips, anticipating the gravity shears before the sensors could even register them. Behind them, the Syndicate cruisers hesitated. They weren't willing to risk their multi-billion credit vessels in the planetary graveyard. They launched drones instead, dozens of them, swarming into the chasm like mechanical locusts. They're gaining, Kalen shouted. Vespera didn't move. She closed her 6 eyes, her bioluminescence shifting to a rhythmic, pulsing gold. She was connecting to the ship's tactical computer, her mind acting as a bridge between the alien tech and the Syndicate's hardware. Fire the rear pulse cannons on my mark, she whispered. Now? Wait. Now. Kalen hit the trigger. The pulse cannons didn't fire in a straight line. Instead, the bolts curved, caught in a localized gravity well Vespera had identified. They looped back, smashing into the lead drones and creating a chain reaction of explosions that blocked the tunnel with debris. You're a genius, Kalen breathed. I am a witness, she replied, opening her eyes. I see the patterns in the void that your machines cannot. They emerged from the other side of Primus 4, and there it was, the monolith. It was a jagged needle of pure white crystal, 5 kilometers tall, anchored to a piece of the first sun's dead core. It glowed with a pale, ancient light, a relic of a civilization that had understood the stars before humanity had even mastered fire. That's it, Kalen said, his voice a whisper of awe, the broadcast point. But the Syndicate was already there. A single command vessel, the Aetheris Prime, drifted near the monolith. It was a massive golden spear of a ship, bristling with weaponry. As the Starseeker approached, a transmission overrode their screens. Director Cyrus Vane appeared. He was younger than Kalen expected, with a face that was perfectly symmetrical and utterly devoid of mercy. He looked like a man who viewed the galaxy as a spreadsheet to be balanced. Mr. Voss, Vane said, his voice a smooth, cultured purr. I must congratulate you on your tenacity. You've exceeded every projection. But the game is over. Hand over the data core, and I will ensure that the remaining workers on Aeon Terminus are spared. Kalen looked at the data core plugged into his console. He knew Vane was lying. The Syndicate didn't spare witnesses. They erased them. You're not getting anything, Vane, Kalen said. My father gave me this key to shut you down, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Vane's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. Then you have chosen to die for a cause that will be forgotten by tomorrow. Kill them. The Aetheris Prime didn't fire its main cannons. Instead, it launched a localized EMP pulse. The Star Seeker went dark instantly. The engines died, the lights flickered out, and the life support began to hiss a final, fading breath. They were drifting, helpless, toward the monolith. Kalen grabbed the data core, his hands shaking. Vespera, the ship is dead. We have to EVA to the monolith. She looked at him, her gold eyes reflecting the pale light of the crystal needle. The bridge, Kalen. The signal requires a host. I know, he said, his voice steadying. I'm ready. No, she said, her lower hand catching his wrist. You are choosing to sacrifice yourself because you think your life has no value beyond this act. You think you are a gear in your father's machine? Kalen looked at her, confused. What are you talking about? This is the only way to stop them. Is it? Vespera moved closer, her presence overwhelming in the cramped, dark cockpit. You told me family is a choice, Kalen Voss. You chose Jax. You chose the workers of Aeon Terminus. And I have chosen you. She took the data core from his hand. The Xylosians were the witnesses. We carry the echoes of the dead so the living can flourish. If a bridge is required, let it be mine. My physiology can withstand the surge. Yours will be shredded. Vespera, no. It's my family's legacy. My sister, my father. It's my burden. It is not a burden, Kalen. It is a gift. And a gift should not cost a life if it can be shared. She leaned forward, her forehead pressing against his. In the darkness of the dead ship, her bioluminescence was the only light. We will do this together, she whispered. We will both be the bridge. 2 graveyards, Kalen. 1 garden. The ship groaned as a Syndicate boarding pod slammed into the hull. They were out of time. Kalen looked at the monolith, then at the warrior woman who had become his world in the span of a few days. He realized that she was right. Sacrifice wasn't about dying alone. It was about living for something bigger. And he wanted to live. He wanted to see what a galaxy without the Syndicate looked like. With her. All right, he said, gripping her hand. Together. They donned their EVA suits, the thin fabric the only thing separating them from the infinite cold. Vespera opened the manual airlock, and they stepped out into the void. 2 tiny specks of defiance drifting toward the ancient white fire of the monolith. The void was not silent. To a human, it was a vacuum, but to Kalen Voss, wired into the Starseeker's last remaining comms and sensing the monolith's ancient resonance through his suit's haptics, it was a roar. The crystal needle wasn't just stone, it was an antenna tuned to the frequency of the universe. Kalen and Vespera drifted across the 200 meters of empty space between their dead ship and the monolith's surface. Vespera used her lower arms to guide their momentum, her movements fluid and practiced. Kalen clutched the data core to his chest, the metallic box feeling like a live coal through his gloves. Behind them, the Aetheris Prime was launching boarding skiffs. The golden ship looked like a predatory shark circling a dying whale. They had minutes, maybe less, before Syndicate boots hit the monolith. We have to find the interface port. Kalen's voice was strained in his helmet. My father's notes said it's near the base, keyed to the Xylosian frequency. There, Vespera pointed. An opening in the crystal, jagged and inviting, glowing with a soft amber light that matched her skin. They landed on the monolith's surface, the gravity artificial and disorienting. It pulled at them from the center of the crystal, making the vertical needle feel like a flat plane. Kalen scrambled toward the opening, his boots clicking against the translucent surface. Inside the monolith was a cathedral of light. Massive pillars of quartz-like material rose into the heights, humming with a low, tectonic vibration. In the center stood a pedestal of obsidian, etched with the same runes Kalen had seen on Vespera's armor. This is it, Vespera whispered. The altar of echoes. Kalen approached the pedestal. There was a slot in the center, perfectly shaped for the data core. He hovered his hand over it, hesitating. If we do this, Vespera, the Syndicate fleet is right outside. They'll see the signal. They'll blow this crystal to dust to stop the broadcast. Then we must ensure the broadcast happens before they can fire, she said. She stepped up to the pedestal, her forearms spreading wide. She looked like a part of the machinery, a living component of an ancient weapon. Connect the core, Kalen. I will initiate the neural link. Wait, Kalen said, grabbing her arm. Vespera, the notes? They said the bridge gets rewritten. If we both do this, what happens to us? To our memories? She looked at him with all six eyes, her expression serene. We will become a part of the echo, Kalen. We will be the story that the next generation of the galaxy tells their children. Is that not a life worth living? Kalen looked at the core, then at the shadows moving outside the crystal entrance. The Syndicate mercenaries were landing. He could see their thermal flares. He didn't want to be a story. He wanted to be a man. He wanted to have coffee with Jax again. He wanted to see the trees on Earth. But he looked at Vespera and saw the weight of 1,000 dead civilizations in her eyes. She had been carrying this alone for a century. I'm not letting you go into the echo by yourself, he said. He slammed the data core into the slot. The monolith erupted. A pillar of blinding white light shot from the pedestal, piercing the ceiling and roaring into the heavens. Kalen felt a surge of energy hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't pain, not at first. It was a flood of information. He saw Lumina reach. He didn't see the disaster. He saw the people. He saw a mother tucking her child into bed. He saw a young engineer, much like himself, laughing with his friends in a communal bar. He felt their joys, their mundane worries, their hopes. And then he felt the cold, clinical harvest of the Syndicate. The Alpha signal was beginning to broadcast, but it wasn't just code. It was the collective scream of 1,000,000 stolen lives, channeled through the monolith and amplified by the first sun's dying energy. Vespera screamed, her bioluminescence flaring to a level that threatened to blind Kalen. Her forearms were locked onto the pedestal, her body acting as the primary conductor. Kalen grabbed her waist, anchoring himself to her, trying to absorb some of the feedback. His mind began to fray. He felt his own memories slipping away, dissolving into the sea of echoes. He forgot the smell of the station. He forgot the taste of synthetic whiskey. He even began to forget Rin's face. No, Kalen roared, his voice lost in the hum of the crystal. I choose to remember. He reached into the link, not as a passive bridge, but as an engineer. He began to organize the chaos. He took the scattered memories and wove them into the Alpha signal. He gave the code a face. He gave the scream a name. Outside, the Syndicate fleet was in disarray. The Aetheris Prime tried to fire its main batteries, but the Alpha signal was already hitting their systems. The void-folding engines began to backfire, the exotic matter inside them reacting to the kill switch. Cruisers began to lose power, their lights flickering and dying as they drifted into the debris field. The golden ship, the pride of the Syndicate, began to groan as its internal structure buckled under the weight of its own failing technology. But the mercenaries had reached the entrance. 6 of them burst into the cathedral, their pulse rifles raised. They didn't care about the light or the signal. They had their orders. Kill them, the leader shouted. Destroy the pedestal. Vespera was trapped in the link, unable to move. Kalen looked at the mercenaries, then at the phase shifter lying a few meters away. He couldn't reach it. He looked at the pedestal. There was a secondary bypass, a manual override for the energy flow. If he triggered it, he could vent the excess power into the room. It would kill the mercenaries. It would also likely kill him. Vespera's eyes snapped open. They were no longer gold. They were pure, glowing white. Kalen, she projected, her voice echoing inside his head. Do not trigger the bypass. The signal is only at 70%. If you vent now, the Syndicate fleet will recover. They're going to kill us anyway, Vespera. Then let them kill us while we finish the work, she replied. Trust the echo, Kalen Voss. A mercenary fired. The pulse bolt hit Kalen in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to his knees, his vision blurring. The pain was distant, muffled by the roar of the data in his brain. Another bolt hit the pedestal, causing a shower of crystal shards. The light flickered. 75%. The mercenary leader stepped forward, his rifle aimed at Vespera's head. "This is for the director, you freak." Kalen didn't think. He didn't use a weapon. He used the only thing he had left, the link. He reached out and grabbed the mercenary's armored boot. He didn't pull. He channeled the echo. He let the memories of the 1,000,000 dead souls flow through his arm and into the mercenary's nervous system. The man screamed, a sound of pure existential horror. He didn't just see his death. He felt the deaths of everyone the Syndicate had ever murdered. He collapsed, his brain unable to process the sheer weight of the suffering. The other mercenaries hesitated, terrified by the sight of their leader's sudden collapse. 80%. The monolith began to vibrate violently. The crystal walls were cracking, unable to contain the sheer volume of the broadcast. Kalen looked at Vespera. She was fading. Her physical form seemed to be turning into light, her edges blurring into the pillar of the signal. "We're not going to make it, are we?" he thought, the words a quiet echo in the shared space of their minds. "We have already made it, Kalen," she replied. "Look." Through the cracks in the monolith, Kalen saw the Syndicate fleet. The Aetheris Prime was engulfed in a series of massive internal explosions. Its golden hull was tearing apart, the exotic matter within its engines finally reaching critical mass. All across the sector, and across the galaxy, Syndicate ships were dying. The era of the Voidfold was ending, 90%. A mercenary fired a final, desperate burst. The bolts hit the pedestal, and the obsidian shattered. The pillar of light flickered, then stabilized as Vespera threw her entire being into the gap. She was no longer a woman. She was a bridge of light, her forearms reaching out to hold the shattering pieces of the universe together. Kalen reached out, his hand passing through her shimmering form. He found her hand, the real one, still warm, still solid in the center of the storm. "I've got you," he whispered. 95%. The monolith began to collapse. The ceiling fell in great crystalline chunks, crushing the remaining mercenaries. The vacuum of space began to howl through the breaches. 100%. The alpha signal peaked, a silent explosion of data that rippled across the stars. Every Syndicate engine, every server, every hidden bunker was hit. The Empire was dark. Then there was only the white light. Kalen felt himself being pulled into the void. He felt Vespera's hand slip from his. He felt the echo swallowing him whole. And then, silence. He was floating. There was no pain, no heat, no cold. Just a vast, shimmering garden of memories. He saw Rin. She was standing in a field of tall grass, her face clear and smiling. "You did it, Kalen," she said, her voice a soft breeze. "You chose them." "I chose her," he said, looking around. "Where is she?" A shadow emerged from the light. It was Vespera. She was whole, her obsidian skin glowing with a steady, peaceful blue. She wasn't 8 feet tall anymore. She was the same size as him. Her 6 eyes were gold again, filled with a warmth that felt like home. "We are in the echo, Kalen," she said. "Are we dead?" She smiled, a human expression that looked perfect on her alien face. "We are as alive as we choose to be." The light began to fade, replaced by the familiar, dim glow of a medical bay. Kalen felt the weight of a blanket. He felt the sting of a needle in his arm. He heard the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. He opened his eyes. He was in a small, cramped room. The walls were made of recycled metal, and the air smelled of ozone and stale coffee. "Aeon Terminus?" he croaked. "Not quite," a voice said. Jack sat in a chair by the bed, his Trelonian scales looking dull and tired. He was covered in bandages, but he was grinning. "You're on the Wanderer, Gearhead. It's a refugee ship. We picked you up from the debris of the monolith. You've been out for 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Kalen tried to sit up, but his shoulder exploded in pain. "Vespera? Where is she?" Jax's grin widened. He pointed to the other side of the room. Vespera sat in a specially reinforced chair. She was covered in medical patches, her forearms wrapped in gauze. She looked exhausted, her bioluminescence faint, but she was alive. She looked at Kalen, and for the first time, her central eyes filled with tears, amber droplets that shimmered in the light. "You kept your promise, Kalen Voss," she said, her voice a low, beautiful rasp. "You didn't let me go alone." Kalen reached out, and she took his hand. Her grip was weak, but it was there. They were refugees now. They had no home, no money, and the remnants of the Syndicate would be hunting them for the rest of their lives. But as Kalen looked at the small, cramped room filled with his friends and the alien woman who had saved his soul, he realized he had never been richer. "We've got a lot of work to do," he said to Jax. "This ship's engines are a mess." Jax laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Same old Kalen. The galaxy just got its freedom back, and all you want to do is fix the plumbing." "It's a start," Kalen said, looking at Vespera. It was the only start that mattered. The silence of the Great Dark was heavy, a suffocating blanket that pressed against the hull of the Wanderer, with the weight of 1 billion extinguished stars. Since the Alpha signal had rippled across the galaxy, the primary void-folding lanes had collapsed, leaving the Aetherius Syndicate's empire in a state of fractured paralysis. Without the exotic matter engines, space had become vast and terrifying again. Systems that were once hours apart were now separated by months of sublight drifting. For the ragtag fleet of refugees, trailing behind Kalen and Vespera, the universe had shrunk to the flickering glow of their recycled oxygen scrubbers and the shared fear of what hunted them in the shadows. Kalen Voss sat in the cramped engineering bay of the Wanderer, his hands buried deep within the guts of a secondary power distributor. The metallic tang of burnt copper clung to his skin, and his side ached where the pulse bolt had seared through his suit 3 weeks ago. He was no longer the pristine corporate engineer. His jumpsuit was a tapestry of oil stains and carbon scoring, and his eyes carried the hollow look of a man who had seen the inside of a dying god. "Easy on the torque, gear head," Jax grunted from across the bay. The Trelonian welder was crouched over a leaking coolant line, his scales dull from the lack of ultraviolet radiation. "You pop that seal, and we're all going to be huffing vacuum before the next shift." "I've got it, Jax," Kalen muttered, wiping sweat from his brow with a greasy forearm. "The distributor is just temperamental. It doesn't like the new fuel mixture." Jax let out a dry, rattling laugh. "This scrap hauler doesn't like anything. We're flying a bucket of bolts through a void full of roaches, and you're worried about the distributor's feelings." The roaches Jax referred to were the Aetherius splinter groups, remnants of the Syndicate's security forces who had survived the collapse and were now acting as piratical warlords. They were desperate, and a fleet of 30 refugee ships was a tempting target for their dwindling resources. Kalen tightened a bolt, his mind elsewhere. Since the monolith, his connection to the data core had changed him. Sometimes when the ship was quiet, he could still hear the echoes, the faint, ghostly whispers of the millions who had died in the Syndicate's engines. They weren't screams anymore. They were a low, resonant hum, a collective memory that resided in the base of his skull. Vespera appeared in the doorway, her massive frame casting a long, obsidian shadow over the bay. She was no longer wearing her battle armor. In its place was a simple gray tunic made of heavy shipcloth, though she still carried her phase shifters at her waist. Her bioluminescence was a steady, calm amber, reflecting the change in her spirit. She had traded the title of Witness for something she called the Gardener. "The Council is waiting, Kalen Voss," she said, her voice a deep musical vibration. "The representatives from the Velonis and Heliox ships are restless. They want to know why we are heading for the Riftward territories instead of the Inner Rim." Kalen stood up, his joints popping. "Because the Inner Rim is a war zone, Vespera. Every splinter group is fighting over the remaining fuel depots. If we go there, we're just offering ourselves up as a buffet." "I know this," she said, stepping into the room. "But they see only the hunger in their bellies and the fear in their children's eyes. They do not see the garden we are trying to plant." "I'll talk to them," Kalen sighed. "Just give me a minute to wash the grease off." Jax watched them, his tail flicking with curiosity. "You two are a strange pair, you know that? An 8-foot warrior and a systems tech. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I'd say some circuit fryer had spiked my water." Vespera looked at the Trelonian, her 6 eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. "The stars do not ask permission to shine together, Jax. They simply do." The council meeting was held in the Wanderer's mess hall, a room that had been converted into a makeshift parliament. There were 12 representatives, humans and aliens alike, representing the 5,000 souls currently drifting in their wake. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the sharp, acidic scent of Krellian pheromones. Captain Rohr, who had survived the destruction of the Perseverance and now commanded the fleet's largest freighter, stood at the head of the table. His uniform was tattered, his metal stripped away, but his presence was still that of a commander. "We're low on everything, Mercer," Rohr said, his voice gravelly. "3 ships are on emergency rations. The air scrubbers on the Siren's Call are failing. We can't keep drifting through the gray space forever." "We're not drifting," Kalen said, leaning over a holographic star chart. "We're heading for Nexara. It's an old research outpost on the edge of the rift. It has its own geothermal power source and enough hydroponic bays to feed the entire fleet for 5 years. Nexara is a ghost station, a human representative from Heliox Spat. It was abandoned 50 years ago because the radiation from the rift was too high." "The radiation levels have dropped," Kalen countered. "I've been tracking the sensor data from the data core. The Syndicate abandoned it because they couldn't void fold through the rift's interference, not because of the radiation. It's the safest place in the galaxy because it's the only place they can't easily reach." "And what about the splinters?" another voice called out. "High Auditor Malcor's fleet was spotted 2 light days behind us. He has a heavy cruiser, Kalen. 1 broadside from that thing, and the Wanderer is stardust." Kalen looked at Vespera. She stood behind him, her arms folded, her presence a silent, immovable wall. "Malcor wants the data core," Vespera said. "He believes he can use it to restart the engines and reclaim his power. As long as he is hunting us, he is not hunting you. If we reach the rift, his cruiser will be useless. Its sensors cannot penetrate the nebula." "It's a gamble," Rohr said, rubbing his jaw. "You're asking 5,000 people to bet their lives on an old tech and an alien warrior." "We're not asking you to bet on us," Kalen said, his voice rising with a sudden, sharp clarity. "We're asking you to bet on yourselves. For 20 years, the Syndicate told us who we were. They told us we were assets, employees, gears in a machine. They told us that family was something they provided in a benefits package." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the desperate, the broken, and the hopeful. "My sister Rin died because she believed that people were more than numbers. My father died to give us a choice. Nexara isn't just a station, it's the choice. It's where we stop being refugees and start being a community. If you want to go back to the Inner Rim and beg the splinters for scraps, go. But if you want to build something that lasts, you follow us." The room was silent for a long, agonizing minute. Then Captain Rohr nodded. "I'm tired of begging," he said. "Set the course for Nexara, Mercer. But if we run into Malcor, you better have a plan that doesn't involve us being blown to the void." Kalen walked back to the engineering bay, his legs feeling like lead. He hadn't told them the whole truth. The data core was failing. The energy surge from the monolith had damaged its crystalline lattice, and the information was leaking. He had maybe 48 hours before the coordinates for Nexara were lost forever. Vespera followed him, her footsteps soft on the metal grating. "You spoke well, Kalen Voss. You gave them a reason to burn." "I gave them a promise I might not be able to keep," he said, collapsing onto a crate. "If Malcor catches us before we hit the rift." "He will not," she said, kneeling beside him. "I have been scanning the long-range frequencies. Malcor is not just following us. He is talking to someone inside the fleet." "A traitor?" Kalen's heart sank. "After everything. Fear makes people do terrible things," Vesper said. "They think that by giving up the witness, they can buy safety for their own kin. They do not understand that the Syndicate does not trade in safety." Kalen reached out, his hand finding hers. Her skin was warm, the subtle texture of her scales a familiar comfort. "We've come too far to lose it all to a backstabber." "I will find them," she promised, her 6 eyes glowing with a fierce protective light. "You fix the engines, Kalen. I will protect the garden." The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic repairs and mounting tension. The fleet entered the outskirts of the Obsidian Cloud, the violet nebula swirling around the ships like a ghostly sea. The interference was getting worse, the sensors ghosting with false readings and static. Kalen was deep in the primary reactor when the alarm blared, a sharp, jagged sound that meant a hull breach. "Vespera!" he shouted into his comms. "Get to the bridge, Kalen!" Her voice came back, accompanied by the sound of phase shifter fire. "They're on the ship!" Kalen grabbed his plasma torch and scrambled up the maintenance ladder. He emerged into the corridor to find it filled with smoke and the sound of screaming. But it wasn't mercenaries this time. It was a group of humans from the fleet, led by the representative from Heliox. They were armed with stolen security rifles, their faces twisted with a desperate, frantic kind of terror. "Give us the core, Mercer!" the representative yelled, his hands shaking. "Malcor promised us we'd be spared if we handed it over." "We're not dying for your ghost station. You're being played," Kalen shouted, holding his torch out like a weapon. "Malcor will kill you the moment he has the data." The representative didn't listen. He raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a shadow swept over him. Vespera dropped from the ceiling, her four arms a blur of motion. She didn't use her blades. She used her hands, disarming the rebels with a speed and precision that was almost surgical. She stood among them, her bioluminescence a blinding, angry white. "You would betray your own kin for the promise of a cage?" she rumbled, her voice vibrating the walls. "You would throw away the future for a single day of survival?" "We're scared," one of the rebels sobbed, dropping his gun. "We just want to live." "Living is not the same as surviving," Vespera said, her voice softening but remaining firm. "To live is to choose. You chose fear. Now choose to be better." She didn't punish them. She pointed toward the escape pods. "Go back to your ships. Help the air scrubbers. Prove that you are worth the life we are fighting for." The rebels fled, shamed by the mercy of a warrior they had tried to betray. Kalen watched them go, a cold lump of dread in his stomach. Vespera, if they were talking to Malcor. "He is already here," she said, looking toward the viewport. Through the swirling violet clouds of the nebula, a massive golden shape emerged. The Void Scythe, Malcor's heavy cruiser. It was scarred and battered, its hull showing the signs of the Great Dark, but its weapons were powered and locked onto the Wanderer. Kalen ran to the bridge, his fingers flying over the console. "We're 10 light minutes from the rift. If we can just jump—" "We can't," Roar's voice came over the speaker. "The siren's call has lost its main drive. They're drifting, Kalen. If we jump, we leave 500 people behind." Kalen looked at the star chart, then at the golden predator closing in on them. He thought of his father's words. The person who broadcasts the signal, they won't make it back. He thought of the choice he had made at the monolith. "We're not leaving anyone," Kalen said, his voice a low growl. "Jax, get the magnetic tethers ready. We're going to tow the siren's call." "Tow her!" Jax yelled. "We'll be a sitting duck for Malcor's cannons." "Then we give him something else to shoot at," Kalen said. "Vespera, do you remember the alpha signal? How I wove the memories into the code?" "I remember," she said, her eyes narrowing. "If I can reverse the polarity of the data core, I can create a localized feedback loop. It won't shut down his engines, but it will flood his sensors with the echoes. He'll be flying blind into a sea of ghosts. It will destroy the core, Kalen," she warned. "Nexara's coordinates will be gone." "I've already memorized them," Kalen said, tapping his temple. "They're in here now, part of my own echo." He looked at her, and in that moment, the humanistic theme they had been building reached its crescendo. It wasn't about the technology. It wasn't about the war. It was about the choice to prioritize the many over the self, to choose the family they had built over the safety they had craved. "Do it," she whispered. Kalen initiated the sequence. The data core began to hum, a high, piercing note that made the hair on his arm stand up. The monitors filled with images, the faces of the millions who had died, the history of the Syndicate laid bare. The Void Scythe fired. A massive beam of golden energy streaked across the void, missing the Wanderer by a few dozen meters as Kalen dumped the feedback. The golden cruiser suddenly swerved. Its lights began to flicker, its weapons tracking randomly into the nebula. Over the comms, they could hear the screams of Malcor's crew, not of pain, but of overwhelming existential realization as the echoes flooded their bridge. "They're blind!" Roar shouted. "Jax, engage the tethers!" The Wanderer lurched as the magnetic cables snapped onto the siren's call. With its engines screaming, the refugee ship pulled the crippled freighter into the heart of the rift. Behind them, the Void Scythe was swallowed by the violet clouds, its golden hull disappearing into the static and the ghost. Kalen slumped in his seat as the data core in front of him shattered, the crystal turning into fine gray dust. The whispers in his head faded, leaving behind a profound, ringing silence. "We're in the rift," Vespera said, her hand resting on his shoulder. Kalen looked at the viewport. The nebula was thinner here, revealing a jagged, beautiful station anchored to a geothermal vent. Nexara. It was old, covered in 50 years of space dust, but its lights were burning, a pale, welcoming green. "We're home," Kalen whispered. "Not yet," Vespera corrected, her amber eyes glowing with a steady, peaceful light. "We are at the beginning." They docked at Nexara an hour later. As the airlocks hissed open, the people of the fleet began to pour onto the station. They didn't move like assets or employees. They moved like a family. Humans helped Krellians carry their hatchlings. Trelonians worked alongside miners to stabilize the life support. Kalen stood on the observation deck, watching his community take its first breath of freedom. He felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't known since before Lumina Reach. He had lost his sister, his father, and his world. But in the darkness of the void, he had found something better. He had found a choice. Vespera stood beside him, her presence a solid, warm reality. "We have planted the garden, Kalen Voss. Now we have to make it grow," he said, reaching for her hand. She squeezed his fingers, her 6 eyes reflecting the green lights of their new home. "We will. Together." The great dark was still outside, and the galaxy was still broken. But on Nexara, the lights were on, and for the first time in 15 years, Kalen Voss wasn't afraid of the silence. The first few months on Nexara Station were a blur of cold iron and hot solder. Kalen Voss lived in the belly of the beast, his days spent recalibrating geothermal taps, and his nights spent dreaming of the Alpha signal. The station was a labyrinth of forgotten science and abandoned dreams, a 5-kilometer needle of steel piercing the heart of the rift. But it was no longer a ghost. It was alive with the sounds of 5,000 voices, the clatter of tools, and the rhythmic thrum of the hydroponic fans. The people of the fleet had transformed from a desperate swarm into a functioning colony. They called themselves the Remnants, a name that carried both the weight of what they had lost and the strength of what remained. Kalen was working on a primary power coupling in Sector 3 when a shadow fell across his workbench. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air always felt a few degrees warmer when Vesper was near. "The Krellian elders are arguing again," she said, her voice a low vibration that rattled the loose tools on his table. "They believe the heating in the lower levels is too dry for their eggs." Kalen wiped a smudge of grease from his cheek and looked up. Vespera was wearing a vest of woven glass fiber, a gift from the Trelonian weavers. She looked less like a warrior every day, her movements fluid and purposeful, her 6 eyes always searching for the next problem to solve. "Tell them I'll adjust the humidity sensors in the morning," Kalen said, his voice raspy from a long shift. "But they have to stop tampering with the manual overrides. If they pop another fuse, the whole sector goes dark." "They do not trust the machines," Vespera said, leaning against the bulkhead. "They trust their own hands. It is a hard habit to break after 20 years of corporate automation." "We're all learning new habits," Kalen muttered, turning back to the coupling. "Like having a say in how we live. It's a lot more work than just following orders." "It is the work of being free," she said. Kalen stopped, his wrench hovering over a bolt. He looked at Vespera, really looked at her. The amber light in her skin was vibrant, pulsating with a steady, healthy rhythm. She had become the heart of the station, the bridge between the different species that had once been segregated by Syndicate policy. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The witnessing, the great void." Vespera moved to the viewport, her eyes reflecting the swirling violet gas of the rift outside. "I miss the clarity of the task," she admitted. "A witness's life is simple. You observe, you record, you remember. There is no doubt in the dark. But here there is doubt. There is conflict. There is the messy business of living." She turned back to him, a subtle shimmer of gold light dancing across her cheek ridges. "But I would not trade one day of this doubt for 1,000 years of the void. Because here I am not just a record, I am a choice." They were interrupted by the sharp, urgent chime of Kalen's comms. It was Captain Roar, and his voice was tight with tension. "Mercer, get to the bridge. We've got a situation at the sensor perimeter." Kalen and Vespera reached the command deck in minutes. The station's bridge was a circular room filled with ancient monitors that Kalen had spent weeks coaxing back to life. Roar stood at the central console, his brow furrowed as he studied a flickering sensor ghost. "It's Malcor," Roar said without looking up. "He's found the entrance to the rift." "How?" Kalen asked, his heart hammering. "The interference should have scrambled his sensors." "He's not using standard sensors," Vespera said, her 6 eyes narrowing as she looked at the screen. "He's using a void echo tracker. It's a prototype the Syndicate was developing to track Xylosian cloaking. It doesn't look for heat or metal. It looks for the resonance of the alpha signal." "He's tracking me," Kalen realized, his hand instinctively going to his chest where the pendant had once hung. "The signal left a mark on my neural map. I'm a beacon for him." "He's brought friends," Roar added, tapping the screen. "2 frigates and the Void Scythe. They're sitting just outside the rift, testing the gravity wells. They'll be on us in 6 hours." The bridge went silent. After months of peace, the shadow of the past had returned, longer and darker than before. "We can't fight them," a human officer said, her voice trembling. "We've only got 2 mining shuttles and a handful of pulse rifles." "We're not fighting them," Kalen said, his mind racing through the station's schematics. "We're going to hide." "Hide?" Roar barked. "This station is 5 kilometers long, Kalen. You can't just throw a tarp over it." "No, but I can sink it," Kalen said. "Nexara is anchored to a geothermal vent, but the anchor isn't fixed. It's a magnetic tether. If we release the ballast and vent the auxiliary gases, we can drop the station 10 kilometers deeper into the rift. The pressure and the gas density will hide us from any tracker he has." "And the station?" Vespera asked. "Can the hull withstand that kind of pressure?" Kalen looked at her, the humanistic theme they had built now facing its ultimate test. The choice wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the integrity of the home they had created. "It was designed as a deep rift research post," Kalen said. "The hull is reinforced titanium and diamond lattice. It can take it, but the geothermal tap will be stretched to its limit. If it snaps, we'll have no power, no air, no heat." "It's a suicide move," Roar said. "It's a gamble," Kalen corrected, "just like before. We trust the station, or we wait for Malcor to board us and turn Nexara back into a slave camp." "I will talk to the people," Vespera said. "They must know the risk. They must choose to sink together." The announcement was made across all sectors. Kalen watched the monitors as families gathered in the communal areas. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw something else. He saw the Krellians moving their eggs to the reinforced central core. He saw the Trelonians checking the seals on the hydroponic bays. He saw humans and aliens sharing blankets and rations, preparing for the dark. They chose to stay. Kalen took his place at the geothermal control station, his hands steady despite the cold sweat on his neck. Vespera stood behind him, her upper arms resting on his shoulders, her lower hands gripping the safety rail. "Engaging ballast release in 3, 2, 1. The station groaned, a sound like a giant awakening from a long sleep. The magnetic tethers shrieked as they were extended to their maximum length. Nexara began to sink. On the monitors, the violet gas of the rift turned to a deep bruised purple, then to a pitch black. The pressure alarms began to wail, a low rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the floor plates. "Steady," Kalen whispered to the machines. "Just a little further." The Void Scythe appeared on the long-range sensors, a golden spark at the edge of the rift. It fired a spread of long-range probes, the white flares illuminating the clouds far above them. "He's lost us," Roar reported from the bridge. "His probes are popping at 5 kilometers. We're below his reach." But they weren't safe yet. The geothermal tap was vibrating violently, the massive tether humming with the strain of holding the station against the rift's turbulent currents. Kalen's fingers flew over the controls, adjusting the magnetic tension to compensate for the pressure. The coupling he had been working on earlier began to hiss, a spray of superheated steam erupting from a seal. "It's going to blow!" Jax's voice screamed over the comms. "The pressure is too high, Kalen. The coupling is failing." Kalen didn't think. He unbuckled and ran towards Sector 3, ignoring Vespera's shout. He reached the bay to find it filled with scalding steam and the sound of tearing metal. Jax was pinned under a fallen support beam, his scales blistering from the heat. "Jax!" Kalen shouted, throwing his weight against the beam. "Get out of here, gearhead!" Jax wheezed, his tail lashing in pain. "The coupling is gone! The station is gonna drift!" Kalen ignored him. He jammed a magnetic wrench into the beam's pivot point, using every ounce of his strength to lever it up. With a grunt of effort, he freed the Trelawneian and dragged him back toward the airlock. But the coupling was still failing. The geothermal power was fluctuating, the station's lights flickering and dying. If the power failed, the magnetic tethers would release, and Nexara would plummet into the crushing depths of the rift's core. "I have to seal it manually," Kalen said, looking at the glowing red pipe. "No," Vespera's voice came from the doorway. She had followed him, her suit already showing signs of thermal damage. "Your skin cannot withstand the steam, Kalen." "I'm the only one who knows the sequence, Vespera." "Then tell me," she said, stepping into the steam. "My skin is reinforced by the carapace. I can hold the seal while you bypass the sensors." Kalen hesitated. The heat was immense, a wall of white fire. Vespera looked at him, her 6 eyes glowing with a calm, unwavering light. "We are the bridge, Kalen Voss," she reminded him. "Remember?" Kalen nodded, his throat tight. He shouted the sequence over the roar of the steam. Vespera moved into the fire, her upper arms grabbing the scalding metal pipe, her lower arms working the manual valves. Her skin began to hiss, the amber light turning to a painful, angry red. But she didn't let go. Kalen slammed his palm against the bypass terminal, his fingers dancing through the emergency protocols. He felt the station's power stabilize, the geothermal hum returning to a steady, deep resonance. The steam began to dissipate as the emergency scrubbers kicked in. Vespera slumped against the pipe, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Kalen ran to her, catching her before she could hit the deck. Her arms were covered in thermal burns, her beautiful amber skin charred and peeling. But as she looked at him, she smiled, a human expression of pure, exhausted triumph. "The station is steady?" she asked. "It's steady," Kalen said, his voice breaking. "We're safe, Vespera." "You did it." "We did it," she corrected, her hand finding his. They stayed in the dark of Sector 3 for a long time, listening to the heartbeat of their home. Above them, Malcor's fleet eventually turned away, unable to find the ghosts they were hunting in the crushing depths of the rift. The next day, the station rose back to its anchor point. The remnants emerged from their shelters, not as victims of a crisis, but as the architects of their own survival. They saw Kalen and Vespera walking through the corridors, bandaged and tired, and they didn't see an engineer and a warrior. They saw a family. Kalen stood on the observation deck that evening, watching the violet clouds swirl outside. He had lost so much to the Syndicate, his sister, his father, his sense of self. But here on the edge of the void, he had built something that the Syndicate could never understand, a home built on choice, not on contracts. Vespera joined him, her arms wrapped in medical gauze, her presence as warm and steady as the geothermal vent. "The garden is bruised," she said, looking at the station's lights, "but the roots are deep." "They're deep enough," Kalen agreed, reaching for her hand. He looked at the small silver pendant he had fashioned for her, a replica of the one his father had given him, but this one was empty. It didn't contain a signal or a key. It was just a piece of metal, a symbol of a promise kept. "I think I'm ready to meet my niece," Kalen said, "when the trade ships start running again." Vespera squeezed his hand, her 6 eyes reflecting the stars they had saved. "We will go together." The Great Dark was still vast, and the galaxy was still full of monsters. But as Kalen Voss looked at the alien woman beside him and the station full of life behind him, he realized that the longest journey wasn't across light years. It was the journey from being a gear in a machine to being a person who chooses who to love. And for the first time in 15 years, the echo in his head wasn't a scream. It was a song. The thermal vents of Nexara Station hummed with a low rhythmic thrum that Kalen Voss had begun to interpret as the station's own respiration. After the harrowing descent into the lightless depths of the rift, the air in Sector 3 felt heavy, saturated with the scent of ozone and the scorched honey aroma of Vespera's healing skin. Kalen sat on the edge of a medical cot, his hands trembling as he watched Dr. Hollis apply a cooling, bioluminescent gel to the crystalline burns on Vespera's upper arms. "You're lucky your physiology is so damn stubborn," Hollis muttered, her eyes shielded by a specialized surgical visor. Any other species would have had their nervous system fried into carbon by that kind of geothermal feedback. "Xylosians are built for the pressure of the deep stars, Doctor," Vespera rumbled, her voice a rough rasp that still carried a hint of its usual melodic resonance. She turned her 6 eyes toward Kalen, her gaze soft despite the jagged red scars tracing her amber skin. "And I had an engineer who knew when to pull the lever." Kalen looked away, his chest tightening. "I should have found a way to bypass it without you having to go in there. I almost lost you, Vespera. After the monolith, after everything, I almost let you burn." "You didn't let me do anything, Kalen Voss," she countered, her lower hand reaching out to squeeze his. The grip was weaker than usual, but the warmth was unmistakable. "We chose to sink. We chose to hold the line. That is the difference between us and the roaches outside. They fight for a paycheck. We fight for each other." Jack sat in a nearby chair, his Trelawney scales looking brighter after a dose of ultraviolet therapy. "She's right, gearhead. You gotta stop thinking you're the only one on the hook for this. We all signed up for the ride. When you told us we were a community, some of us actually listened." Kalen leaned back, the cold metal of the bulkhead pressing against his spine. The alpha signal was gone, the data core reduced to dust, yet the echoes remained. He could feel them in the back of his mind, a faint, shimmering map of connections. He wasn't just a tech anymore. He was a walking repository of 1,000,000 stolen lives, a living bridge between the past and the future. The peace of the medical bay was shattered by the sharp, rhythmic pulse of the command-level priority alert. Captain Rohr's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding older and more tired than Kalen had ever heard him. "Mercer, Vespera, get to the bridge. We've got a broadcast coming in on all frequencies. It's him." They reached the command center just as the primary monitor flickered to life. The image was grainy, distorted by the rift's interference. But High Auditor Malcor's face was unmistakable. He was no longer the polished corporate executive. His gold-trimmed uniform was torn, and his eyes were bloodshot, shimmering with a manic, void-touched intensity. "People of Nexera," Malcor sneered, his voice dripping with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "You think you've escaped. You think the dark will hide you. But the Syndicate is not a company. It is an idea. And ideas do not die simply because their engines stop." He leaned closer to the camera, his image wobbling. "I have the void scythe anchored at the rift's throat. I have 60,000 tons of explosive ordnance aimed at the geothermal vents directly above your position. If you do not hand over Kalen Voss and the witness within 3 hours, I will trigger a seismic cascade that will turn your station into a tomb of molten iron." The bridge crew went silent. Rohr looked at Kalen, his hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial blade he had salvaged from the Perseverance. "He's bluffing," Rohr said, though his voice lacked conviction. "A cascade would destroy the rift's stability. He'd lose his own ship in the backlash." "He doesn't care," Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "He's lost everything. The Syndicate, his status, his future. He's not trying to win anymore. He's just trying to ensure he's not the only one who loses." Vespera stood tall, her 6 eyes narrowing as she scanned the tactical data. "He is a dust licker who has run out of dust. He wants the echoes, Kalen. He believes that if he can capture the witness and the key, he can bargain with the other splinter groups for a seat at the table." "I'm not giving him anything," Kalen said, a cold, hard clarity settling over him. "But we can't let 5,000 people die for my neural map. Captain, what's our status?" "Foobar," Rohr said, using the old military slang for a hopeless situation. "We've got 2 shuttles with working thrusters and enough pulse rifles to arm a dozen people. We can't reach him before he fires." Kalen looked at the geothermal controls, then at Vespera. A plan began to form, a dangerous, unpredictable, utterly gearhead plan. "He's tracking the alpha signal's resonance, right?" Kalen asked. "The market left on me?" Vespera nodded. It is like a beacon in the dark to his trackers. Then we give him what he wants, Kalen said, his fingers flying over the console. But we don't give it to him on a plate. We send it as a Trojan horse. Vespera, do you remember the feedback loop we used at the monolith? The one that flooded their sensors? It requires a conductor, Kalen, and the data core is gone. I'm the conductor, Kalen said, meeting her gaze. The echoes are still in me. If I can hook my neural interface into the station's primary antenna, I can broadcast a phantom signal. It'll look like we're launching an escape pod with the witness aboard. He'll stop the countdown to intercept. He can't resist the prize. And when he intercepts it, Roar asked. Then we hit him with the real echo, Kalen said. Not just a sensor ghost. I'll dump the entire neural archive of the Syndicate's crimes directly into his ship's bridge. It won't just scramble his sensors, it'll overwhelm his crew. While they're dealing with the ghosts of a million people, we use the geothermal vents to create a localized pressure wave. We won't hit him. We'll push him. Push him? Jax asked, having followed them to the bridge. Into the riftward current, Kalen explained. If we time it right, the current will catch the void scythe and drag it into the heart of the nebula. Without void-folding engines, he'll be trapped there for 1,000 years. It's a long shot, kid, Roar said. And what happens to you? Plugging your brain into a station-wide antenna is a quick way to get your brain scrambled like a bad ration pack. I won't be doing it alone, Vesper said, stepping forward. I am the witness. I will act as the buffer. I will hold the connection so the energy doesn't burn him out. Kalen looked at her, seeing the burn still fresh on her arms. Vespera, you're hurt. You shouldn't. I am a witness, Kalen Voss, she interrupted, her voice booming with a sudden, fierce pride. And witnesses do not hide when the truth needs to be told. We are partners. We are family. And family doesn't let one person carry the weight of the galaxy. They had 2 hours. The station was a hive of frantic, silent activity. Kalen worked in the central antenna hub, a freezing chamber at the very top of the station's spire. He sat in a chair surrounded by jury-rigged cables and neural induction coils. Vespera stood behind him, her forearms wrapped around his shoulders, her skin glowing with a steady, defiant amber. Ready? She whispered into his mind. Ready, he thought back. He closed his eyes and opened the gate. The flood was instantaneous. It wasn't like the monolith. This was personal. He felt the fear of the people on Nexara. He felt Jax's stubborn loyalty. He felt Roar's weary hope. And then he felt Malcor. The High Auditor's presence was a jagged, oily void in the neural sea, a mouth that only knew how to consume. Kalen channeled the ghosts. He reached into the dark corners of his memory and pulled out the images of Lumina Reach, of the Xylosian colonies, of every world the Syndicate had ever touched. He wove them into a single shimmering needle of data and aimed it at the void scythe. Interception in 10 seconds. Roar's voice came over the comms, faint and distant. Kalen felt Malcor's greed. The High Auditor had seen the phantom pod. He was lowering his shields to bring it aboard with a tractor beam. He thought he had won. He thought he was finally going to be the master of the echoes. Now, Kalen roared. He released the archive. It wasn't a broadcast. It was an avalanche. 1 million lives, 1 billion memories, all screaming the truth at once. Kalen felt the energy surge through him, a white-hot fire that threatened to vaporize his very soul. But then he felt Vespera. She was there, a cool, vast presence that absorbed the heat, her own spirit acting as a lightning rod for the data. On the monitors, the void scythe began to shudder. Its lights flickered, changing from gold to a chaotic, strobing violet. Weapons tracking systems spun wildly, firing at nothing. Over the open channel, they heard Malcor's scream, a sound of pure, shattered reality. Vents! Kalen gasped, his vision blurring. Captain Roar didn't hesitate. He triggered the manual release for the auxiliary geothermal vents. A massive plume of superheated gas erupted from Nexara, hitting the void scythe with the force of a tectonic shift. The Golden Cruiser, caught with its shields down and its crew incapacitated by the echoes, was tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. It spun into the riftward current, the violet gas swallowing it whole. Within seconds, the golden spark was gone, lost in the eternal turbulence of the nebula. Kalen felt the connection snap. He slumped forward, his heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm. Silence returned to the spire, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. Vespera held him, her arms a warm, solid cage. Her bioluminescence was dim, almost extinguished, but her eyes were clear. "It is over," she whispered. "The roach is gone." Did we kill them?" Kalen croaked. "No," Vesper said. "We gave them exactly what they wanted. They are now the witnesses to their own crimes. They have all the time in the universe to listen to the echoes." They sat in the dark for a long time, two broken people in a tower of crystal and steel. Below them, the people of Nexara began to cheer, a sound that rose through the station's structure like a rising tide. They had survived. They had defended their home. Kalen looked at his hands. They were still covered in grease, still scarred by a lifetime of fixing things, but they were no longer shaking. He realized that the echoes in his head were quiet now. The ghosts had been heard. The truth had been told. "What happens now?" he asked. Vespera leaned her forehead against his. "Now, Kalen Voss, we stop being heroes. We stop being witnesses. We just be." "I can work with that," Kalen said. He stood up, leaning on her for support. Together they began the long walk down from the spire, back to the messy, beautiful, imperfect life they had chosen. The Syndicate was a memory. The war was a ghost. But Nexara was real, and it was waiting for them to come home. The wedding of Kalen Voss and Vespera of the Mountain Clan was not a quiet affair. In the 6 months since the defeat of High Auditor Malcor, Nexara Station had transformed from a desperate refugee outpost into the premier neutral trade hub of the Riftward territories. The Nexara Accords had been signed by 3 major independent systems, establishing the station as a sovereign sanctuary for all species, free from corporate or military interference. The ceremony was held in the station's newly restored botanical ring, a massive transparent dome filled with flora from a dozen worlds. Human ivy climbed alongside Xylosian light ferns, and the air was thick with the scent of earth roses and the sharp, citrusy aroma of Trelonian spice vines. It was a garden grown from the debris of a graveyard. Kalen stood at the front of the pavilion, his formal suit a deep navy blue, tailored to fit a man who had finally stopped hunching his shoulders against the weight of the world. Beside him stood Jax, looking uncharacteristically dignified in a scaled waistcoat, and Captain Roar, who had traded his tattered uniform for the simple, elegant robes of a station counselor. "You look like you're about to have a hardware failure, gearhead," Jax whispered, nudging Kalen with a scaly elbow. "Relax, the station isn't going to blow up today. I checked the distributor myself." "I'm not worried about the station, Jax," Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the rear entrance of the dome. I'm still not sure how I got here." "You chose to stay," Roar said, his voice quiet and steady. "That's how anyone gets anywhere worth being. You stopped running, Kalen, and you invited the rest of us to do the same." The music began, a complex, multi-tonal harmony that blended human strings with the resonant, subterranean hum of Xylosian percussion. The crowd of 5,000 stood as one. There were Krellians in their iridescent shells, humans in their best colonial finery, and a delegation of Xylosian survivors who had traveled from the Outer Rim to see the last witness find her home. Then Vesper entered. She was magnificent. She wore a gown of woven light fiber that shimmered with the colors of the obsidian cloud, violet, deep indigo, and flashes of amber. Her armor had been replaced by ceremonial jewelry made of polished Nexara crystal. Her 6 eyes were all fixed on Kalen, glowing with a warmth that felt like a sunrise after a century of winter. She walked with a fluid, rhythmic grace, her forearms held in a traditional Xylosian gesture of peace. As she reached the pavilion, she didn't just stand beside Kalen. She leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, a gesture that brought a hush over the massive crowd. "Kalen Voss," she said, her voice a melodious vibration that filled the dome. "I have carried the echoes of 1,000 dead worlds, but today I carry only the echo of your heart." "Vespera," Kalen said, his voice steady for the first time in his life. "I spent 15 years fixing machines because I was afraid of people. I thought my value was what I could produce for the Syndicate. But you taught me that my value is who I choose to love. The ceremony was a blend of two cultures. They exchanged vows in human standard and high Xylosian. They shared a cup of earth wine and a shard of Xylosian solar salt. And then, Kalen produced the final piece of the ritual, a new pendant crafted from the very crystal of Nexera Station. "In my culture," Kalen said, his voice carrying to the very back of the dome, "we say that family is a choice. We choose who stands with us in the dark. We choose who shares our light. I choose you, Vespera, now and for all the cycles to come." He didn't put the pendant on her. He put it on himself. And then she produced an identical one and placed it around her own neck. "The bond is sealed," Captain Rohr announced, his voice booming with pride. "By the authority of the Nexera Accords and the choice of the remnants, I pronounce you partners in all things." The cheer that erupted from the crowd was loud enough to vibrate the reinforced glass of the dome. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy, a sound that echoed through the corridors of the station, through the geothermal vents, and out into the violet clouds of the rift. The reception lasted for 2 days. There was food from 40 systems, music that defied categorization, and a sense of unity that the Syndicate could never have imagined. Kalen found himself dancing with a Krellian hatchling, laughing as the small creature tried to mimic his clumsy human steps. He saw Jax and Dr. Hollis engaged in a heated debate over the ethics of cybernetic enhancement, and he saw Rohr sharing a drink with the leader of the Xylosian delegation. Late on the second night, Kalen and Vespera found themselves alone on the observation deck, watching the stars wheel past. The rift was quiet, the violet gas shimmering with a peaceful inner light. "You're thinking again," Vesper said, her upper arm wrapping around his waist. "I was just looking back," Kalen said, leaning his head against her side. "I looked out at the obsidian cloud and thought about the man I was 6 months ago. That Kalen Voss was a ghost, a gear in a machine that didn't know it was broken. I had lived my life as a series of reactions to trauma, a technician fixing the present to avoid the past. I thought that by ordering a bride, I was buying a piece of a life I didn't think I deserved. I wanted someone quiet and small because I was too afraid to be seen by someone big and loud. I was a man who defined himself by his losses, by the empty spaces where my sister and father used to be. But standing here with Vespera's hand in mine in a station full of people who call me friend, I realized that my father's real legacy wasn't the alpha signal. It was the capacity to choose. We spend so much time thinking we are the victims of our history that our blood and our trauma dictate our future. But the real power isn't in the engines or the data cores. It's in the quiet moment where you decide that someone else's life is worth more than your own safety. I found my soul in the eyes of an alien warrior, and I found my family in a crowd of refugees. We aren't the echoes of what was lost. We are the architects of what remains. I'm no longer fixing machines to survive the dark. I'm building a home to celebrate the light." Vespera squeezed his hand, her 6 gold eyes reflecting the distant stars. "The garden is growing, Kalen. What will we plant next?" "Whatever we want," Kalen said. "That's the beauty of it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handheld transmitter. He hit a button, and a new signal began to broadcast from the station. Not a kill switch, not a scream of agony, but a simple, repeating message in every known language. "Nexera is open. The choice is yours." Kalen looked up at Vespera, his heart full, his mind finally at peace. He wasn't the lonely engineer anymore. He was a partner. He was a leader. He was home. "I spent my entire life believing that my family was a tragedy that happened to me, a series of graves I had to carry. It took a war and a stranger twice my size to make me see that family isn't a debt you're born with. It's a choice you make every single day. I look at my station now and I don't see species or ranks. I see people who chose to stay. I wonder, in your own life, who are the people you've been treating as obligations rather than choices? If you could strip away the blood and the history, who are the souls you would choose to stand with when the lights go out?" Kalen tucked his hand into Vespera's lower arm, and together they watched the first trade ship of the new era emerge from the nebula. He didn't look back at the dark. He only watched the light as it grew.